chamber was alive with tension, a theater of sharpened words and restless eyes. Cameras zoomed in, reporters' fingers hovered above keyboards, and the audience braced for what they thought would be yet another clash of egos. Vivek Ramaswamy, the businessman turned political firebrand, had already earned his reputation as a ruthless debater. Every pause of his breath felt like the wind-up to another cutting strike. He thrived on spectacle, on dismantling opponents with a smirk and a soundbite designed to trend before his words had even finished echoing. And across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, unapologetically fierce, steady in her conviction, her very presence a rebuke to the dismissive caricatures often thrown her way. The air felt charged, as if everyone in the room was waiting for the inevitable. Vivek's next attempt to break her down, to belittle, to overpower. He leaned forward, his voice sharp, his rhythm confident. The words came fast, calculated. Listeners braced for the familiar sting, the sting that had made his name. But then something shifted. A pause, not the pause of calculation, not the pause before a strike, but a pause that carried weight, hesitation, and, impossibly, respect. The audience's eyes flicked upward. Whispers began to spread in the silence, and then, with deliberate calm, Vivek spoke words no one expected to hear. "Representative Crockett," he said, his tone measured, his eyes unflinching. "Your leadership here is something this chamber should be proud of." The room froze. You could almost hear the collective gasp ripple through the air, disbelief echoing louder than applause ever could. Reporters glanced at one another in shock, uncertain if their notes had betrayed them. Did Vivek Ramaswamy, arch-debater, scourge of progressives, just honor Jasmine Crockett? Some stared in silence, their mouths ajar, waiting for the punchline that never came. Others sat upright, scanning for sarcasm, expecting the twist of the knife. But none arrived. His words were steady, clear, respectful. Jasmine herself blinked only once, her composure unbroken. Yet a flicker of something softer moved across her face, surprise mixed with a quiet dignity. And outside the chamber, phones lit up. Clips were already being cut, headlines already being written. Did Vivek just... The disbelief was spreading faster than the sentence itself. But why would Vivek, whose brand thrives on confrontation, suddenly honor a political rival? The answer reveals a side of American politics few have ever seen. To understand the weight of that moment, you have to rewind. Because in today's America, politics isn't just debate, it's combat. The airwaves are littered with shouting matches, where the loudest voice claims the spotlight and the cruelest line becomes the headline. Respect has become a relic, compromise a weakness, and dignity a casualty of the endless war for clicks, views, and viral outrage. This is the climate both Jasmine Crockett and Vivek Ramaswamy stepped into. A culture addicted to confrontation. Jasmine Crockett carved her name not by softening her words, but by amplifying them. She is unapologetic, fire-forged, and passionate. When others tried to dismiss her, she doubled down. When critics mocked her style, she turned their mockery into fuel. Her reputation grew as a defender of those who rarely got a seat at the table. Immigrants, marginalized voices, communities long ignored. Every time the camera swung her way, she embodied boldness, not the arrogance of entitlement, but the courage of conviction. For her supporters, she became a living reminder that standing tall in the face of condescension is its own form of leadership. On the other end of the spectrum stood Vivek Ramaswamy, a man who built his political persona on disruption. Where Jasmine represented grit and grassroots power, Vivek represented precision and provocation. He was the disruptor who came armed with statistics, with slogans sharpened to pierce through any defense. A relentless debater, he understood the performance of politics, the timing of a viral clip. Every time he stepped onto a stage, people braced themselves, not for dialogue, but for demolition. So imagine these two figures colliding. One, a progressive fighter with a voice that could cut through dismissal like steel. The other, a conservative firebrand who thrived on leaving opponents flustered, red-faced, or speechless. They were, by all accounts, political opposites destined not for civility but for combat. The audience knew it. The reporters knew it. Even the viewers at home watching on split screens and Twitter feeds were prepared for the clash. They wanted sparks, drama, the latest clip that would confirm what they already believed, that in American politics, opponents cannot will not find common ground. The expectation was confrontation, the same cycle on repeat. Vivek would aim sharp and Jasmine would fire back. Each side's supporters would cheer their champion and jeer the other. Nothing would change except the trending hashtags and the talking points for the next day's news cycle. But that's not what happened. Instead, as the exchange unfolded, something unfamiliar crept into the room. The air didn't thicken with insults. It bent slowly toward something different, something no one anticipated. Because just when everyone thought the fight was about to explode, Vivek stopped, his words reshaping into an acknowledgement, a rare and startling shift. And yet, at this very moment, the script flipped. What happened next didn't just shock the room, it left millions scrambling to replay the clip online. For years, Vivek Ramaswamy built his reputation not as a consensus builder, but as a disruptor. He wasn't the kind of figure you invited into a room to smooth tensions. He was the one you called when you wanted fireworks. From the moment he entered the national stage, he cast himself as the contrarian, arrogant to some, unapologetically blunt to others, but impossible to ignore. His brand was provocation, his language sharp enough to slice through even the most seasoned politicians. Before politics, Vivek made his fortune in biotech, where he positioned himself as a visionary willing to break the rules. He carried that same disruptive swagger into the political arena. On debate stages, he didn't just participate, he dominated. He had the cadence of a trial lawyer and the confidence of a CEO who had never been told no. Viewers could sense it. He relished the spectacle of verbal combat. His greatest hits became infamous. At one debate, when asked about foreign policy, he turned the question into a savage indictment of his rivals, calling them career politicians addicted to failure. The audience gasped, then roared, half in outrage and half in admiration of the sheer audacity. In another clash, he mocked an opponent's climate platform, dismissing it as a wet paper bag of slogans, before pivoting into a 10-point manifesto of his own. He wasn't subtle. He wasn't polite. But he was unforgettable. Every time he stood behind a podium, the formula repeated: aggressive posture, rapid-fire facts, the sly grin of someone who knew he was getting under your skin. It was theater, yes, but it was also tactical. By being the loudest and most cutting voice, he guaranteed himself headlines. In a media ecosystem that rewards conflict, Vivek understood better than most that controversy isn't a liability. It's a currency. Compliments, however, were not part of his vocabulary, especially not for opponents across the aisle. His fans adored him precisely because he never gave ground. He was the man who wouldn't bow, who never conceded a point, who never let political correctness soften his edges. To his critics, that made him arrogant, even cruel. To his admirers, it made him fearless. Either way, one thing was clear. Vivek Ramaswamy did not praise his rivals. So when the words left his mouth, words honoring Jasmine Crockett's leadership, it wasn't just unexpected, it was downright shocking. This was a man who had built his entire public identity on dismantling others, suddenly stepping out of character. For those who had followed his rise, the moment seemed surreal. Could the same Vivek who once sneered at progressives as actors in a bad play now be applauding one of their fiercest voices? The paradox made the moment larger than itself. Because if Vivek, the razor-tongued antagonist, the corporate tech disruptor, the man whose verbal takedowns had become legend, could pause to acknowledge dignity on the other side, what did that mean about the story unfolding before us? So why did this razor-tongued disruptor suddenly break character? The seeds of that answer lie in the story of his unlikely counterpart. To understand why Vivek's words landed with such gravity, you have to know who Jasmine Crockett is, not just as a congresswoman, but as a symbol. She did not come from dynastic wealth or political legacy. She came from struggle, from communities where opportunity was earned through grit, where voices were too often drowned out, and where standing up meant doing so against the wind of doubt. Jasmine's rise was never inevitable. It was forged. From her earliest days, she learned to navigate a world that underestimated her. She carried the weight of being both a black woman in spaces not designed for her and a relentless advocate in a system that rewards conformity over conviction. Instead of softening her edges to fit in, she leaned into them, wielding her boldness as a shield and her authenticity as a sword. While others rehearsed lines to appease party machines, Jasmine spoke in tones that reflected lived reality, the anger, the hope, and the urgency of communities left behind. Her journey through law and public service painted her not as a polished insider, but as a fighter. She represented clients who couldn't afford expensive defenses, families who saw in her a last chance at justice. When she eventually stepped into the political arena, she brought with her the unfiltered energy of someone who had spent years listening to the unheard. Her campaign rallies weren't staged productions. They were raw, electric gatherings where people saw themselves reflected in her words. Then came the viral moments. In a Congress dominated by carefully choreographed sound bites, Jasmine's speeches cut through like lightning. Clips of her fiery interrogations spread across social media, earning both adoration and derision. In one particularly infamous exchange, she silenced a rival who tried to belittle her by responding with the kind of piercing clarity that left no room for mockery. Supporters replayed it again and again, celebrating her refusal to shrink in the face of arrogance. Critics scoffed, branding her as too loud, you're too brash, you're too unapologetic. But every insult became proof of her necessity. Because for the people she represented, dignity did not mean silence. For her constituents, her passion wasn't an act. It was a reflection of their daily struggle for recognition. While so many politicians treated the chamber like a stage, Jasmine treated it like a battleground for justice. And yet, amid all that fire, there was dignity at her core. She didn't wield her words for vanity. She wielded them for principle. She didn't perform to trend. She fought to defend. She could face insults without collapsing into bitterness, and she could call out hypocrisy without losing her grounding in values. It was this balance, fierce but principled, bold but purposeful, that set her apart. For young women watching, she was proof that you don't have to dilute yourself to lead. For immigrants and marginalized communities, she was evidence that the overlooked could seize the microphone and refuse to give it back. For those disillusioned by the theater of politics, she was a reminder that leadership can still mean something real, and every time an opponent tried to box her in, she broke the frame. Every time someone underestimated her, she reminded them, and the country, that authenticity is its own form of power. By the time she walked into the chamber that day, Jasmine was more than a politician. She was a narrative, a symbol, a living contradiction to the cynicism that so often defined Washington. And it was precisely this history, the story of a fighter fueled by conviction, that set the stage for a moment no one saw coming. The chamber was packed, every seat filled, every eye fixed on the spectacle unfolding under the harsh white lights. The cameras never blinked, trained tightly on the two figures whose reputations all but guaranteed fireworks. Commentators whispered from the sidelines, already scripting their takes before the first line had been delivered. It wasn't just another hearing, it was theater, and everyone in the room knew it. Vivek Ramaswamy leaned forward first, his trademark confidence radiating like a man stepping into an arena he had already conquered. His voice was crisp, quick, threaded with the kind of precision that made his supporters lean in and his critics grit their teeth. He launched into a critique that cut wide and deep, lacing together policy attacks with subtle jabs at credibility. It wasn't sloppy passion. It was engineered precision, the way a surgeon wields a scalpel. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. Her eyes held steady, her body language unshaken. When her turn came, she met fire with steel. Her voice rang through the chamber, not shrill, not panicked, but measured, rooted in the authority of someone who has had to justify her presence more times than she could count. Each rebuttal was direct, forceful, and laced with that unmistakable Crockett clarity, cutting away the fluff and dragging the truth into the light. The room's energy rose with each exchange. Vivek's sentences landed like strikes, Jasmine's responses like shields snapping back into place. To the audience, it felt like the slow tightening of a coil, winding toward the inevitable snap. This was the collision everyone had come to see, the clash that would reaffirm the tribal lines of modern politics. One side would cheer their warrior, the other would dismiss the rival as reckless or weak. As the minutes ticked on, the rhythm became familiar. Vivek's critiques grew sharper, Jasmine's defenses more unyielding. Every pause in his delivery was bait, every pause in hers a challenge. The audience leaned forward, anticipating the explosion, waiting for the moment when voices would overlap and tempers would boil over. The chamber buzzed with the electricity of expectation. Here it comes. Then Vivek raised his hand slightly, as if to punctuate his next assault. His tone dropped lower, slower. You could almost feel the room hold its breath. Surely this was the strike, the devastating one-liner that would set Twitter ablaze and cement another viral moment in his growing archive of takedowns. Even Jasmine, unflappable though she was, braced herself, her posture signaling readiness for the next blow. But the blow never came. Instead, silence. Not the silence of hesitation, but of deliberate choice. Vivek's eyes narrowed, not with aggression, but with something closer to reflection. The audience shifted uncomfortably, waiting for the punchline that seemed delayed. The reporters raised their pens, unsure if they had missed a beat. The air grew thick, suspense folding over the room like a blanket. And then, against all odds, Vivek broke the pattern. And with one sentence, he stunned both his critics and his fans. The silence hung for a beat too long, the kind of pause that made every ear in the chamber lean in. Every lens tighten its zoom. Vivek's reputation had trained the audience to expect a dagger, sharpened and gleaming, about to be plunged into his opponent's argument. But when he opened his mouth, what spilled out wasn't venom. It was something else entirely. "Representative Crockett," he began, his tone steady, his gaze unwavering. "I want to take a moment, before I continue, to acknowledge what so many here overlook. Your leadership in this chamber is a proud moment for the people you represent, and frankly, it's something the entire country should be proud of." For a fraction of a second, time fractured. Did he just say what everyone thought they heard? The chamber froze, a ripple of confusion sweeping through the air like a sudden gust. A gasp erupted from the gallery seats. Even the stenographer's hand seemed to hesitate, as if doubting whether to record such a line. Vivek Ramaswamy, the man whose brand was built on takedowns, whose smirk had humiliated rival after rival, had just given a public, unqualified compliment to Jasmine Crockett, one of his most obvious ideological opponents. It wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't backhanded. It was real. Murmurs spread across the room, hushed voices rising like an unexpected tide. Commentators at the edge of the chamber exchanged glances, their mouths half open, scrambling to recalibrate their notes. The camera operators, who had been ready to pan for an angry explosion, zoomed tighter on Jasmine's face. And there she was, calm, poised, as always. But her eyes betrayed a flicker of something unusual. Surprise. Not the kind that rattled her composure, but the kind that revealed she too knew the weight of what had just been said. Jasmine Crockett had been praised before, of course, but never here, never like this, and never from someone like him. For the audience at home, it was the kind of moment that demanded a replay. Phones buzzed as clips began circulating before Vivek had even finished his sentence. Twitter feeds exploded with fragments. Did Vivek just praise Crockett? TikTok edits appeared in real time, looping the sentence with dramatic music. On Instagram, political meme accounts froze the frame on Jasmine's face, captioning it with disbelief. Even Vivek had to admit it. The more people watched, the more it hit. This wasn't just unexpected, it was uncharacteristic. Vivek was known for dismantling, for mocking, for reducing rivals to rhetorical rubble. Compliments were not his currency. And yet here he was, breaking his own brand, flipping the script in front of a live national audience. Why did it matter so much? Because in a culture addicted to division, respect had become radical. For a man like Vivek, whose critics accused him of arrogance and showmanship, to pause the theater and show admiration, it cracked through the cynicism like sunlight through heavy clouds. The crowd in the chamber didn't erupt in applause. They didn't quite know how to react. Instead, the reaction was quieter, more telling. A stunned silence punctuated by scattered murmurs, heads turning, phones lifting, eyebrows arching in disbelief. The lack of noise was its own noise, the collective acknowledgement that something different, something rare had just happened. Even Vivek's supporters didn't know what to do with it. Some felt pride. He was proving he wasn't just a provocateur, but capable of something deeper. Others felt unease. Was this a crack in his armor, a moment of weakness? And his critics? They were thrown into chaos, scrambling to decide whether to dismiss it as a stunt or admit the power of the words themselves. But Jasmine's response sealed the moment. She didn't gloat. She didn't break her composure. She didn't seize the spotlight with self-congratulation. She nodded slightly, dignified, acknowledging the words without overindulging them. That subtle grace amplified the weight of Vivek's statement. Because the truth was, this wasn't just about him choosing to praise, it was about her being worthy of it. In that instant, the chamber transformed. It wasn't an arena of combat, but a stage where dignity briefly triumphed over division. And whether you admired or despised Vivek, you couldn't deny it. This was different. Online, the ripple spread faster than wildfire. Clips trended across platforms, hashtags erupted. Respect across the aisle to Vivek and Crockett on proud moment. Journalists abandoned their pre-written scripts, rushing to publish pieces that began with words like stunning, unprecedented, rare. Late-night hosts scribbled new monologues. Even celebrities weighed in, some praising Vivek's rare humility, others praising Jasmine for commanding the kind of respect that could bend even her sharpest critics. But inside the chamber, the story wasn't done. Because Vivek's pivot didn't just stun, it reshaped the energy entirely. The moment forced everyone, allies and rivals alike, to sit up straighter, to rethink what they were witnessing. It was no longer business as usual, and as the murmurs grew, as the weight of the sentence echoed through the chamber and across millions of screens, one truth became impossible to ignore. Something had shifted, but the ripple effects didn't stop there. What happened online in the hours that followed transformed this into a national conversation. Section 7. The aftermath shockwaves. The moment the clip hit the internet, it detonated like a cultural firework. Within minutes, timelines were flooded with disbelief, fascination, and endless replays of the exact second Vivek Ramaswamy's voice shifted from sharp critique to rare respect. Twitter was the first to catch fire. Users clipped the 7-second soundbite and captioned it with everything from shock to celebration. "Wait, did Vivek just give Jasmine Crockett props?" Trended side by side with, "This is the collab I never expected." TikTok was no slower. Young creators layered the clip with dramatic music, zooming in on Jasmine's composed reaction while plastering text across the screen. "Respect looks like this." Others spliced it into compilations of her fiercest moments, ending with Vivek's line like a mic drop from an unlikely ally. Memes poured in, some humorous, some earnest. One viral post simply read, "If Vivek can respect Jasmine, maybe America isn't doomed after all." Commentators scrambled to keep up. Progressive pundits marveled at the significance. For someone like Vivek, who never concedes ground, to pause and give that recognition, it speaks to Jasmine's undeniable leadership. Conservative voices were more divided. Some applauded the moment as evidence of maturity, a refreshing deviation from endless partisanship. Others dismissed it as theatrics, a ploy to soften Vivek's image for broader appeal. But regardless of interpretation, everyone was talking about it. Late-night shows seized the moment, their writers dropping everything to draft punchlines. One host joked, "When Vivek complimented Jasmine Crockett, somewhere pigs sprouted wings and started flying over Washington." The audience roared. Another host took a more serious tone. "It shouldn't be shocking for politicians to respect each other, but it is. And that's the problem, and maybe the hope of our politics today." What made the moment resonate wasn't just the words themselves, but the contrast they created. People had come to expect the usual script. Vivek delivering another takedown, Jasmine responding with fire, the chamber erupting into predictable tribal cheers. Instead, they got a breach in the wall, a crack in the formula, a reminder that even in a political landscape poisoned by division, respect was still possible. Ordinary citizens amplified the shockwaves. Teachers posted about showing the clip in classrooms to spark conversations about civility. Parents tweeted about playing it for their kids as proof that you don't have to tear someone down to prove a point. Activists shared it as a rare example of recognition across ideological lines. Proof that dignity can still command attention even in an age of cynicism. And then came the hashtags, respect across the aisle, yes, proud moment, Crockett and Vivek. They trended not just in Washington but nationwide, spilling into every corner of the internet. Celebrities chimed in. Athletes reposted the clip with captions about sportsmanship. Musicians layered it into remixes. Even international observers weighed in, some marveling at the sight of American politicians acknowledging one another without condescension. The ripple effect was undeniable. For a single evening, The usual headlines of scandal and outrage were replaced by a clip that gave people something different. Permission to imagine a politics not defined entirely by contempt. It was fleeting, perhaps, but powerful, and the more it spread, the more people leaned into it, not just to watch but to share, to claim as part of their own hope for what America could be. And yet, beyond the viral memes and clips, the real lesson of this moment runs far deeper. In the aftermath of all the noise, the hashtags, the late-night jokes, and the endless rewinds of that single clip, one truth began to crystallize. Respect across divides is not weakness. It is leadership. What unfolded in that chamber was not simply Vivek Ramaswamy offering a rare compliment. It was the recognition that Jasmine Crockett's dignity, her unflinching authenticity, was too powerful to ignore, even for someone whose reputation thrives on confrontation. Jasmine did not seek validation that night. She did not alter her stance, soften her tone, or compromise her principles. She showed up as she always does, fierce yet composed, unapologetic yet anchored in conviction. And for once, the usual script of political combat bent under the weight of that authenticity. When Vivek acknowledged it, however briefly, he was admitting that dignity resonates louder than division, that service carries more weight than showmanship. And isn't that a lesson we've all longed to see mirrored in our public life? Every viewer who has ever been underestimated at work, every student whose voice was dismissed, every immigrant family told they didn't belong, this moment carried something personal. It whispered, "Your worth does not depend on the approval of those who doubt you. But when your dignity shines through, even your fiercest critics cannot look away forever." In that way, Jasmine's story transcended the chamber. It became a mirror for millions who know the sting of being overlooked, mocked, or written off. Her composure was not just about politics. It was about resilience in the face of noise, courage in the face of cynicism, grace in the face of arrogance. And that is why Vivek's words mattered, not because they changed her, but because they revealed her impact for one rare moment. Americans saw that respect is still possible, that truth can cut through theatrics, that leadership is not the loudest voice in the room, but the one that carries dignity without apology. The lesson is universal. Respect is not concession, it is conviction made visible. It is the quiet power of standing so firmly in your truth that even opponents are forced to recognize it. And so the question is not whether Vivek praised Jasmine. The question is, what will we do with this rare reminder of respect in our own lives? And so we arrive back at the headline that stunned America. Vivek Ramaswamy lauds Jasmine Crockett's leadership as a proud moment. What began as just another tense exchange in a chamber filled with cameras and cynicism transformed into something else entirely. A cultural moment that reminded us that dignity, even in the heat of conflict, cannot be denied. For many, it was a fleeting clip on their timeline. For others, it was a story to share with friends, a reminder that politics doesn't always have to be poison. But for those who felt the weight of Jasmine's journey, the immigrant, the worker, the dreamer, the everyday person who knows the ache of being underestimated, this moment was more than news. It was validation. This is why we tell these stories, not just to marvel at the unexpected, but to find ourselves reflected in the courage of those who rise above the noise. Jasmine Crockett stood tall, and in doing so, she inspired millions. Vivek's words, rare as they were, became the unintentional amplifier of that truth. So now the story belongs to you. Carry it forward. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that respect is still possible, that dignity still commands attention, that even in the most divided arenas, humanity can break through, because the world held its breath once in that chamber, but it does not have to end there. Join this community, subscribe, add your voice, and let's spread more of these moments. Moments where justice, respect, and dignity outshine division. The stage has been set. The question is, will we let this be a single spark, or the beginning of a brighter fire?